Welcome, everybody. This is a side event on sustainable lifestyles for climate action and policies for all. It's a UNFCCC SB 58 in Bonn in Germany, and for those who are in online on YouTube. I would like to first introduce the organizers. Please. And then we have Vrettos from REScoop.eu, and then we have Fraunhofer Institute, Josephine Tröger, Gunnar Boye Olesen from INFORSE and SustainableEnergy, and myself, Judit Szoleczky from INFORSE network. It is a very important thing about lifestyle. If we can change our lifestyle, we can combat climate change, because it is contribute actually quite a lot. And in this session, you will hear about it, that how a European project has made it, made a survey, and how it can contribute and how much it can contribute and what kind of recommendations we can give. Moreover, we have REScoop.eu here, and Chris will speak about the potential of and policies needed for energy communities to play their role in reducing emissions in Europe. So I welcome Chris, and the floor is yours.
Great, thanks a lot. Welcome everyone. I think we often find ourselves in these global climate events and thinking, okay, but how do I translate these maybe abstract, huge discussions into concrete, actionable projects on the ground that can actually directly involve local citizens? I'll try to give you an example of what I think many of us could do. It's energy communities. At least something that is very prevalent in Europe. But before I do that, I'll just take a step back to say who is REScoop. We're the European Federation of Citizen Energy Cooperatives. We are based in Belgium, and we were formed in 2013. We represent more than 1,900 energy cooperatives, which in turn represent more than 1,200,000 European citizens. So what is an energy cooperative? What is this term you're gonna hear me repeat again and again in this presentation? It's a group of citizens, but also municipalities and small and medium-sized enterprises that collectively cooperate on energy transition projects. So energy communities are usually cooperatives. That means they're separate legal entities, and they abide by the 7 international cooperative principles. So they are voluntary and open for anyone to become a member. They're democratically controlled by their members. This is super important. Every member has 1 vote. They're autonomous and independent from external influence, which means that they're actually driven by the members themselves. It's quite groundbreaking, because you might be hearing about energy cooperatives and what is this hippie talking about, but these are really actually recognized through EU policy at the highest level. In fact, in 2019, through the Clean Energy for All Europeans package of directives, the Commission acknowledged renewable energy communities and citizen energy communities, allowing basically for citizens to come together to form these groups and create local renewable energy projects in their areas to promote energy security, to promote energy self-sufficiency, and so on. In fact, the contribution that citizens and cooperatives could play to the EU's climate goals it's enormous. As you can see, half of EU citizens could be producing their own energy by 2050, meeting 45% of the EU's energy demand. So what kind of activities can energy communities actually engage in? Everything basically in the energy market, produce their own energy, distribute it through creating, let's say, local microgrids. So you have that peer-to-peer exchange of energy there at the neighborhood level or at the local level, storage, demand response, but even citizen-led renovation. We have this example like in Ireland or in the Netherlands a lot, where we see citizens coming together to renovate entire neighborhoods. So really, citizens can actively engage in all parts of the energy system. And this is actually, these two activities, the citizen-led renovation and the community heating and cooling, are two things that I really want to stay on for a second, because buildings are responsible for more than 36% of all greenhouse gas emissions, whereas heating and cooling represents 50% of our energy consumption. So it's quite important that we address these two huge sectors from an energy perspective, but it's also very important that we include citizens in the process. So we have, for example, in Ireland, a local energy community that has renovated over 800 homes and 25 communal buildings, leading to 8.8 gigawatt hours of energy savings. In Denmark, maybe Gunnar, you can tell us more about this later, but 75% of all district heating systems are owned by cooperatives. So really this shows how we can build a model of energy sovereignty, let's say, where the profits from energy projects stay within local communities and serve the local community instead of big corporations or whatever. So this goes to show, let's say, a transformation in how we think about energy from a commodity into a common good that serves the purposes of self-sufficiency. In fact, I just want to briefly talk about the graph that you see on the bottom right of the screen. This is from EcoPower. It's the largest cooperative supplier in Belgium and one of the biggest energy communities in Europe. And you see the red line there is the price of energy from commercial suppliers in the past year, so throughout the energy price crisis that we experienced. And the green line is the price that EcoPower offered to its members. And you see the huge difference in price here, because the purpose of EcoPower is not to maximize profits and returns to its shareholders, but it's actually to tackle energy poverty, to provide energy security through renewable energy at the local level. And this goes to show the fundamental difference between energy cooperatives and commercial energy suppliers. And another great thing to mention here is that, as I said before, energy communities are democratically governed, which means that they allow for each member to have one vote. So there's all of these, let's say, checks and balances in power to ensure transparency and genuine inclusion. But of course, we are at SB 58, and before that at COP, and we'll be at COP 28 in Dubai, and all that people are now talking about is climate finance. You know, we know what needs to be done more or less, but everyone is asking where is the money to fund it. So one thing that we've been doing as REScoop, together with our partners CE Bankwatch and Climate Action Network Europe, we've tried to create a public financing tracker looking at whether 19 EU member states are using public funds to support energy communities. I'm going to be super, I'm not going to go through the criteria, but I'm going to show you the maps, but I'm just going to briefly explain the color coding behind it. So once you see red, it means that there's no mentions of energy communities in the EU public funding of these countries. And you see green, well, it means that they're really supporting energy communities. So you can see here the maps of the Recovery and the Resilience Fund. This is from the Modernization Fund. And this is from the Cohesion and the Regional Development Funds. So this goes to show, let's say, an easy-to-access tool that you can find in our website to track whether EU countries are actually supporting energy communities. We think this is very important, that public finance steps in to de-risk these investments. And I'm just going to very quickly explain what makes Italy and Spain stand out, because they're really supporting energy communities. They're putting a lot of public finance into them. And they're providing holistic support. They're providing legal capacity building. They're helping with grid connections. So this really goes to show the example of a couple of countries that really want to help citizens get involved in the energy transition. And we commend them for that. We think this is very important. Explorer tracker. Take a second, maybe, if you want to take a screenshot. This is the link. And I'm going to go to the final part of the presentation by saying that across the EU, what we're seeing is that civil society is really ringing the alarm of many times funds being misspent. This is public EU funds going to fossil fuels, going to projects that destroy biodiversity, but this is of course super important about global discussions as well. We know a Reuters investigative report showed a week ago, I think, that countries like Japan or Italy are claiming they're providing climate finance and it's going to coal or gas projects. So really we have to take a step back and be very vigilant about where climate finance is actually headed. So for my final slide, I'll just say a couple of other quick policies to unlock the potential of energy communities and actually engage in the participation of citizens in the energy transition. We have to create one-stop shops, so places, be it, let's say, a government office where citizens can go and access all sorts of information around how they can transition to clean energy, how can they put a PV on the rooftop, how they can join a local energy community. We need bike lanes for permitting. Many times small citizen-led energy projects find it very hard to connect to the grid because the grid is saturated through large-scale industrial, let's say, renewable energy projects. So we need to make sure that there is space dedicated for citizen energy projects. We need the legal framework. We need every country in Europe and beyond to allow for citizens to produce their own energy collectively through what we also have in Europe, energy communities. And finally, we need to create a level playing field between larger industrial, private, renewable energy development and smaller citizen-led communities. That's it from me. Thanks a lot. I try to be as quick as possible, being mindful of the time.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting and it was a good base for our next discussion. And now I would like to introduce Josephine Tröger and Abigail Alexander Howe, who is probably online. Abigail, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, welcome to you also. And they are from the Fraunhofer Institute for Systems and Innovation Research in Germany. And they are the leaders of this Fulfill project, which we will hear also about. But first of all, Josephine will speak about the sufficiency and the more sustainable lifestyles, which are drivers for reducing climate impacts and resource use. She will introduce us to the concept, what characterizes more sufficient lifestyles in a European context. There was also a result of a survey of more than 9,000 people across Europe. Welcome, Josephine.
Thank you for being here. Do you hear me? Yes, no. So yeah, as already said, Abigail is also there. We are not the project leaders of the project. It is Elisabeth Dütschke and Sabine Preuß from Fraunhofer Institute in Germany. And we are a project consortium, which is really, I would say, huge. And many people are contributing to this project. And yeah, and also Philipp Schepelmann, who comes afterwards, will present some results. And I will now introduce a little bit the sufficiency concept. I was in this project at the beginning with also this conceptual and methodological concerns, and we also already published some deliverables, and I will give you some brief overview. A brief overview. Yeah, but sufficiency, I hope you have heard of it. It is one part of the sustainability strategy, or one pillar, one would say, of the sustainability strategies. We have efficiency, consistency, and sufficiency. And I think everybody knows what efficiency is. Efficiency improves the input-output ratio, and more efficiency, technical devices, and so on. So the productivity of resources should be increased, but there we have this rebound problem. And the second pillar is this consistency approach, where we try to establish circular economies or circular processes. For instance, this wind engine here is a symbol of it. And sufficiency now is this part which was forgotten over the past years a little bit, and now is coming more into the debate again. And maybe you've also heard that the IPCC in 2022 published a definition which was sufficiency policies are a set of measures and daily practices that avoid demand for energy, materials, land and water while delivering human well-being for all within planetary boundaries. And so let's say the new thing of this, or the important thing is that sufficiency tries to capture both this ecological part and the downsizing part in combination with the human well-being part. And yeah, this is also what interested us in this sufficiency project, in the Fulfill project, and we depicted an own definition, which is here written down. I will read it aloud. Fulfill understands the sufficiency principle as creating the social, infrastructural, and regulatory conditions for changing individual and collective lifestyles in a way that reduces energy demand and greenhouse gas emissions to an extent that they are within planetary boundaries and simultaneously contributes to societal well-being. So it is a huge definition, but it captures a lot of facets which are quite important. And to disentangle it a little bit, we have this sufficiency principle as an enabler for structural change that needs these structures that the people can act in a sufficiency-oriented way. And we have, on the other hand, this sufficiency part, which is a kind of voluntary an intent-oriented reduction of absolute emissions. Then we have to decide on which levels. If you see the individual level, so one can say that people who say, I want to reduce my emissions, and I really do this, they are sufficiency-oriented. So this is another part of the concept. And then the sufficiency concept also assumes that these structures enable sufficiency and a good life together, and also in line with basic need satisfaction. So we have sufficiency as an indicator and also a driver for individual and societal well-being. So I hope you now got a little bit an idea of the concept and the facets of it. And in our research, we wanted to analyze it with a multi-level and multi-method approach, just kind of symbolizing which levels of interest we have in this project. And I was involved in this micro-level perspective, so analyzing households and individual perspectives. And we want to have, in the end, a broad description of sufficiency lifestyles and initiatives. And yes, we also wanted to disentangle this sufficiency by force, which one would say it's more like poverty, and from sufficiency by intent, because that's a core problem. We will see it in the data afterwards as well. And we want to explore drivers and barriers for sufficiency lifestyles across European countries. And yes, this was the structure of this working package we had, and we had, we wanted to run, or we run representative surveys in the first task, and then we also had qualitative parts from Negawatt, guided by Negawatt, and then we are now in this task 3 and task 4 part. So you just get a short overview. So, but now I wanted to show you some results on this European perspective. First, some methodological concerns. We assessed the carbon footprint, and we assessed these 4 areas, or basically these 4 areas: space and hot water heating, electricity, motorized transport, and nutrition. You may have seen some of these calculations already, or maybe you've tried a calculator for yourself as well. This is a smaller one than other ones maybe assessed, but it's one. These are the main 4 contributors to emissions, so therefore we selected these 4. And then we calculated a total carbon footprint, or at least Abby calculated it, and to have this emission parts of the sufficiency. And now some results. We have 5 countries in our sample, and we had Latvia, Italy, Germany, France, and Denmark. And here you have the mean scores of the total carbon footprint. We assessed, or the data was assessed in 2022, but we asked the participants to give their emissions, we assessed how they behaved in 2021. So it was also Corona, and so you have to notice that flights are not assessed here. That's a little bit a problem. As we all know, flights are a really huge problem, but nevertheless we have we assessed many parts of lifestyles which are important and contribute to emissions. And what we can see here, that we have Germany and Denmark quite a little bit higher than the other ones, but also a very similar structure. And now regarding the sectors, here we can see that diet contributes the most emissions in all countries, which is quite interesting, and maybe also an artifact from the Corona period. And we can also see that the heating and hot water contributions differ between the countries. So, but also we see a lot of similarities across the countries. So, and as I said, from the conceptual part, we were interested in well-being and health. As we see, they are both very much intertwined with sufficiency or part of sufficiency. So we assessed, we used a scale from the WHO, which was the quality of life scale. And it was 11 items, and we calculated the overall mean score. And what you can see here is that it is quite equal across the countries. There's not so much a difference between the countries, and we had a programming error in France, so we cannot report the well-being in these well-being means here. But yeah, there's a medium level of well-being across countries. And now what is interesting now to correlate it or to combine it with the emissions, and what we can see here, the average carbon footprint does not correlate with well-being in 2 of 4 countries, and the correlations in Italy and Latvia are very small. It is a little bit interesting, I think, but what is even more interesting is when you look at the sectors. Well-being correlates positively with the carbon footprint for transport across all countries. So the interpretation would be that the higher the people, the more they are mobile or move with carbon or carbonized in a carbonized way, let's say, by car, so that they feel more or they are more satisfied with their life and give answers on well-being which are quite higher than in case they are not so much mobile. So that's an interesting correlation, I think. And in contrast, the correlation between well-being and the carbon footprint for diet differs between the countries. It's not significantly correlated in Denmark, Germany, and Latvia, but significantly and positively correlated in Italy. This means, for instance, that for respondents in Italy, higher well-being is associated with a more carbon-intensive diet. So that's quite interesting, I think. And now this negative correlation is also quite interesting. Let's say then the lower the heating emissions, the higher the people, the higher their well-being. And this might be a kind of thing that connects to the presentation before. Then people who are part of communities or have their PVs at home and produce their own electricity, they perceive a higher well-being. Yeah. So then we also assessed sufficiency orientation. It was a self-reported sufficiency attitude scale, and the numbers you can read maybe later in our deliverable. But what is interesting here is that awareness of resource wastage through lifestyle-related consumption is at a medium level across countries, so it's good news. But we need to be somewhat more cautious in regard to materialism and material affluence, because there are some differences across the country. So, for instance, this item, I think it is unnecessary to have this affluence of different products in our supermarkets. There's quite a low share that strongly agree. For instance, in Latvia, in comparison to France, the people, there are more people who say, yes, that is unnecessary to have this affluence of different products in our supermarkets. Yeah. Furthermore, we assessed if the people like to borrow or rent things, and here we have some interesting results that Germany and France show a higher awareness and greater openness for renting and borrowing items, which is interesting, but they also have a higher emissions. So maybe we have this problem of rebound from borrowing or renting stuff, or it is as we have self-ratings here, we do not know what is here going on. Yeah. And then what we also were interested to now go closer into this low level or low carbon footprint groups, and we identified several groups from our sample. So we had these structuration, or we separated quartiles. So we had the lowest 25% of the total carbon footprint, and the average total carbon footprint, which was then in the medium, and the highest 25% of total carbon footprint. And you see at the left side, then we also combined it with the well-being index, so to share the or combine the groups to show the highest well-being and the lowest well-being. And from this, we separated again the groups, and to have in final these groups which you see down at the lower part of the slide. The group 1 was very sufficient, the group 2 was sufficient, but the group 3, and this is very interesting, show a low carbon footprint and low well-being. And now I want to give you some detailed results here from these groups. Group 1, here we have that individuals in this group are predominantly female, not deprived, and tend to exhibit a sufficiency-oriented lifestyle, which is quite interesting. So, and the group 2, which are sufficient in at least one area of which we analyzed, these individuals are not deprived and are comfortable on their current income. They tend to support environmentally oriented policies and consider themselves to be eco-friendly consumers. And the group 3, which maybe is a little bit a problematic group because they show low carbon footprint, but also low well-being. And in this group, we have individuals that are predominantly female, tend to have a low income, and to not be employed full-time. So, yeah, we see here already that there are some crucial problems in this group. They exhibit many characteristics of deprivation and include not having a stable income and not being able to afford balanced meals. They tend to have unsafe conditions in the winter months and feel they require more living space. They tend not to support liberal-oriented policies, and they are also more likely to clean, to do the shopping, the washing, and to take care of social life on their own. So, and I have to say that in this project, we also analyzed this gender issues and this injustices quite more detailed, but I was not involved in this project part, so you need to look up further results in our deliverables. Yeah, but I will not go through the other groups because they're not so, well, I just say that the group 5, this high carbon footprint, this is very classical. These individuals tend to be male, to have higher income, to live in a house and not in large cities. They tend to be employed full-time and not to display signs of deprivation. And they tend to prefer conservative policies and do not exhibit a sufficiency-oriented lifestyle. Yeah, it's more likely that someone else in the household does the cleaning, the washing, and takes care of social life. Well, this is quite similar to other results, focusing on who is more or less sufficiency-oriented or consumes more or less. So, and final results from our study. So these are results only for Germany and based on regression models. And what you can see here, I will not read it aloud, but we have again this problem that income and also deprivation in a certain sense contributes to higher footprints. And on the contrary, we have this awareness part. So if the people say they are sufficiency oriented, this has an impact on emissions. So they in tendency, they downsize their emissions. And also one structural component is that living in rural areas contributes to lower emissions or helps the people to decrease their emissions. Let's say it's like this. So, and this is really interesting finding, or many findings that are interesting. And what we can see here is that it's always a mixture between infrastructures on the one hand that really enables people to maybe live more sufficiency-oriented. And yeah, also this awareness is important, but this needs enabling structures. So as quite a short summary or wrap-up, yeah, we find people showing high sufficiency and well-being across countries, but they are comparatively low, of course. And we have common predictors that are good news. With them, one could work. Yeah, and Germany and Denmark have higher awareness, but also higher emissions. Income and deprivation plays a significant role, but it contradicts sufficiency from the concept and also here, as we saw on the data. Yeah, and this is something we really should look upon, and also if we want to scale sufficiency-oriented lifestyles up, so we need to disentangle this problem. sector-specific sufficiency and well-being aligns with each other. This is also good news, but also we need to look for detailed exploration here. So is well-being before the people, what is the causal relationship, I would say, that is interesting. So is the well-being before people behave sufficiency-oriented, or is it coming afterwards, or how is the direction? And infrastructures seem to give people the ability to decrease consumption by intent. So we have seen it in the electricity part, or in this when people have their own production of electricity or PV on their roofs. So they can they have higher well-being, and so they can decrease their consumption, and they feel empowered to contribute to climate adaptation and so on. And this is something which is interesting in the concept itself, and which we need to foster. And so next steps for our project is that we explore and analyze the causality more in detail, and using the data from the second wave. So we have a second wave where we also explore in these 5 countries the footprint and all the other variables, and we want to see if some policies or something which happened in the countries have contributed to an increase of sufficiency orientation. And then we have some framing experiments where we will look on how people behave in regard to support for policies that are in favor of sufficiency. Yeah, that's it for my part, and I'm looking forward to your questions afterwards.
Thank you very much. And then here you can also see the website of the Fulfill project, fulfillsufficient.eu, where you can get more information, and you can also see the organizations which were partners of the project, which was supported by the EU Horizon fund program. And then I would like to introduce Philipp Schepelmann from Wuppertal Institute, Germany. And he will speak about that afterwards, that we made all this survey, then we have made interviews and mapped the different initiatives across Europe and what kind of policies can support these sufficiency initiatives. And it is in the food and transport and housing sector. And Philipp, can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes, welcome.
All right. So thank you that I can share our results with you. I will start with the good news first. What we found out about the local sufficiency initiatives in Europe. Cities and towns have a rich and diverse spectrum of sufficiency initiatives. In our Fulfill project, we have mapped 50 examples of such initiatives in Denmark, France, Germany, Italy, India, and Latvia, which address sufficient lifestyles in critical areas such as housing, mobility, or food consumption. The initiatives encourage, for example, the use of vacant buildings. They stimulate car or ride sharing, the use of alternative modes of transport like cargo bikes or public transport. They reduce energy-intensive delivery of material-intensive packaging of food. Especially in the food sector, they promote new relationships between local producers and consumers. They foster alternative production, processing, and distribution of food and save it from going to waste. So these sufficiency initiatives we analyzed and fulfill are mostly voluntary and non-profit. For example, associations and cooperatives, but they are also commercial sufficiency initiatives. So what's the value of these initiatives on the local level that we found? Our surveys and interviews suggest that urban actors engage in sufficiency initiatives primarily because they realize an experience of shared purpose. Urban sufficiency initiatives seem to anticipate physical limits to growth, which the majority of contemporary urban actors are unable to realize because they are locked in exploitive, growth-oriented system rationalities. Sufficiency initiatives are manifestation of resistance against these rationalities, offering a recessive alternative development options. So you might refer to these as front runners of what the Club of Rome, for example, refers to as a new enlightenment. So a new emancipation movement. They enable an emancipation from hegemonic, exploitive urban systems. So in patchy urban systems, they establish pockets of alternative futures. They have systemic potential because the resilience of urban systems may rely on their skills when eventually limits to growth can no longer be denied. Restricting framework conditions will kick in and exploitive strategies will become dysfunctional. Under the condition of physical limits to growth, the future of urban systems might depend on knowledge generated by the multitude of intentional communities, eco-villages, and sufficiency initiatives where alternatives to dominant production and consumption patterns, lifestyles, and social practices are developed and tested. So this is the good news. We have a very rich landscape of these alternative practice-oriented initiatives, and they have a considerable and important potential. Nevertheless, we've found out that the local sufficiency initiatives and municipalities have actually a difficult relationship. Local sufficiency initiatives emerge in urban settings or rural town settings which are anything but sufficient. The metabolism of cities and rural towns almost completely depends on the primary production of other systems in order to perpetuate their resource-intensive operation and expansion. Cities and towns nowadays absorb growing quantities of material and energy from complex, globally organized production and supply chains. In return, they excrete harmful emissions and waste. In some, modern cities have the ecological properties of parasites and seem to follow their aggressive reproductive behavior by definition on the expense of their host system. Their governance is programmed for supporting economic and physical growth. It is characterized by mutually reinforcing political, fiscal, legislative rationalities that drive their physical expansion. So much about the towns and their current positioning. And based on our analysis of the literature, our surveys and workshops, and the case studies that we did on the local sufficiency initiatives, we would like to propose the hypothesis that local sufficiency initiatives represent frugal lifestyles which co-evolved as a counter-movement against these unsustainable urban lifestyles and expansionisms that are now dominating contemporary cities and towns. We have found no evidence, however, that local sufficiency initiatives have resulted in a transition of growth-oriented urban regimes or landscapes, which is under the current socioeconomic conditions highly unlikely. Even though their activities are tolerated and sometimes meet individual or even collective support from municipal administrations, the majority of representatives of local sufficiency initiatives report altogether precarious development perspectives and lacking support. So therefore, we have our preliminary policy recommendations are structured on a short-term level and medium-term level and have a long-term perspectives. In a short-term perspectives, we need strategic niche management in our unsustainable towns and cities, which could offer niches in which sufficiency initiatives would be temporarily protected from the full force of normal selection pressure of modern urban systems. In a medium-term perspective, metrics and indicators for the satisfaction of human needs could enable an evidence-based development of sufficiency governance. And this could enable them in the long term a change of framework conditions, infrastructure, habits, and dominating value systems, which would eventually allow the emergence and stabilization of sustainable consumption and production patterns, such as practice in sufficiency initiatives that we have analyzed. So these are the main findings. They are at the moment preliminary, and some of our recommendations, and I look forward to this discussion with you later on. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And it's good news and bad news, as you told. And now I would like to introduce Gunnar Olesen from SustainableEnergy Denmark and INFORSE-Europe. And he will speak about how quantifying the climate effects, how do we quantify these things, and the effects of sufficiency policies and measures. And he mentions also the clever scenario, which he has been involved with it. And beside that, he will try to map it up, the policies for energy communities and sufficiency in the current national climate plans and the national determined contributions. And finally, some recommendations we can hear from him. I think you should. Sorry, you should have to move to the computer here.
No, it's all right. Next slide, please. Yes, just no, one back. Yes, as just told, I'm with the International Network for Sustainable Energy. We have a number of different roles. We have this Sustainable Energy News. We have a few copies that you can pick up at the end over there. We also have been working for transition to renewable energy, to 100% renewable energy for almost 20 years, and been showing how it can be done in principle in many places. I hope you can hear me better now. And we are very happy to be able to participate in this project where we are going more in details with that part of our scenarios, which was that people should live a more sustainable lifestyle. And this fulfill scenario, if you want, we have a leaflet about it here. But after this session, we will also make all the presentations online, so you can see what this project is coming up with. And this is actually the first time that this is presented publicly. So this is really your time to see what we are finding out by the deeper analysis of sufficiency. This project will produce a lot of results over the next year, but we haven't come so far in the Fulfill project that we can say exactly how much each sufficiency measure will actually contribute to reduce climate change. Luckily, in the INFORSE network, we also participate in another project, the Clever Energy scenario, which is building on how to transform Europe into 100% renewable energy in a climate-compatible way, and where sufficiency plays a big role. And there we have tried in simpler ways to quantify it, and this is what I'll tell a little about. There's some leaflets about this scenario here also here you're welcome to pick up, but you can also look it up on the internet where there's a lot more information on this Clever Energy scenario website. So please, next slide. So coming up with how much does it actually mean to work on sufficiency in addition to renewable energy and energy efficiency. So in this clever scenario, we'd assume that we can restrict new constructions in EU countries with large dwelling size per capita. We don't need to live in endless increasing size of houses. Many places in Europe, people are living with this 30-40 square meter per capita, which we think is a reasonable size. A few countries have less, and they should probably build some more. But some countries have more than that, and it's not like Denmark and Belgium. and doesn't necessarily need to build anything more. It has to be how to share the existing space. So this is what we propose, that instead of construction sector should build ever more houses, they should turn into efficient heating, and particularly deep renovation of 60% of the buildings. And if that's combined, I mean, both the efficiency with deep renovation, but also this efficiency with no more building of houses in the countries with most houses already, we can save more than 50% of the heating in EU until 2050. That's what we have found. And how do we do it? There has to be incentive for deep renovations and also for the efficient heating, like exchanging the gas and oil boilers with heat pump or district heating. And there also has to be incentives to move to smaller houses and flats and to share houses. And then probably we need some kind of house taxation depending on the house size. So it's gradually more expensive to live in a big house. And then we probably also should have promote division of houses in more flats. And there's also movement of tiny houses, which we have met in the study about our sufficiency measures, and who have a lot of barriers, so we can remove them. Another thing is transport policies. And in transport policies, we can reduce the travel-intensive lifestyle. Europeans are traveling a lot on a daily basis, and we don't need to move so much around, really. If we make services and workplaces closer to dwellings, we promote moving closer to work and working from home. It could be company policy to promote these things, and it could be backed up by state policies. We can make daily transport need possible with active transport like bicycling, and of course promote public transport. Next, please. And this is what we expect we can get out of it. So the first thing is that we are not expecting a huge reduction in passenger traffic in EU, because, but on the other hand, we don't expect an increase, which is equally important. And here we say we can reduce the actual personal transport 21% by all these measures. But if we combine that with a strong decarbonization of the sector, we can reduce the energy use with 77%, both because that all this bicycling and public transport is much more efficient than using cars, but also by using electric cars, and particular small electric cars are 3 to 10 times as efficient as a standard petrol or diesel car. Next, please. And if we quantify all this, here it's numbers for, it was difficult to do for all the countries in this clever scenario, even though we covered the entire EU. So we just have these numbers here for France, Germany, and UK, where we have see that the total we can reduce the final energy consumption 50 to 55% of the overall of all the sectors. But of that, this reduction of due to sufficiency, which is both like reduced demand, but it's also to stop the increase of demand, because in many cases countries are expecting increasing, for instance, driving in the future, which we actually don't need. So this is, if we combine these things, we think that out of the 50 to 55%, 20 to 30% can come from sufficiency. That's our best estimate. Next slide. And this is a result of the scenario where you see how we are reducing this 50 to 55%. At the same time, we are increasing renewable energy. So by 2050, we can have energy supply of still some biomass, but not a lot more, and it should be sustainable and no import. And then onshore and offshore wind and solar as the main things, but also we included geothermal, and we included ambient heat from the heat pumps also in this. So actually, if you subtract that, the reductions would be even bigger. Next slide, please. And this is a little about the scenario. We're combining the renewable energy, energy sufficiency, energy efficiency, and sufficiency. And this can a way we can reduce emissions fast, and we think we can keep emissions budget within a fair share for EU for the 1.5 degree. EU has 5.1% of the population, so this 24 to 26 gigaton of CO2 from 2020 to 2050 is the fair share. It is around 5.1% of what IPCC finds that we, with 50% probability, can keep temperatures below 1.5 degrees, and that's what we defined as a fair share. And if with this effort, there's no need for CCS, there's no need for nuclear. We have hydrogen, but to a limited extent, because some industries need hydrogen. But to use hydrogen for a lot of things, like somebody is advocating, we don't find reasonable. It's a very inefficient way of transporting energy. It has to be made from electricity with losses, and in the where it's used, it also have losses. But if we don't want to make CCS, we need to enhance natural sinks. Next slide. I'll now go into a little bit. So what do we actually have from the climate agreements and from the Paris Agreement and this national determined contributions, the NDCs? And we try to look up what is and in this looking about in which NDCs we actually see mentioned of sustainable or green lifestyle or sufficiency, in the sense that we are meaning it that you have a sufficient lifestyle. We only found it in total of 17 countries out of maybe more than 150. And of this, only one country in Europe had, and only one country in the OECD countries have mentioned it, that's UK. So I just mention here, what do they actually include when they are talking about this sustainable lifestyle in the UK? They talk about healthy diet. Then particular England, Wales and Scotland have circular economy strategies to reduce waste, make goods keep longer and reduce resource use. And Scotland strikes out that it has a strategy with a transport hierarchy to make transport choices that minimize climate impacts, so that walking and bicycling should be first and public transport next and driving should be last. And Scotland also has a vision to make homes warmer, greener and more efficient. Next slide, please. But of course, one reason why we don't see this in the NDCs could be that it doesn't appear in the EU's NDC. And as you probably know, EU has one common NDCs, and all the 27 EU countries have NECPs, National Energy and Climate Plans, that are added up to the EU NDC. And here we see with the orange bars how many of the actions in this of the climate action which are actually linked with sufficiency. And you see a fairly small number for these countries. And then on the blue bar, you see what was proposed by some citizen assembly reports that has been done in these countries. So it actually shows that from the public, as long as the citizen assembly are representative of the public, there's much more understanding of having sufficiency actions as part of climate action than when you see the actually policies which are presented. Next slide, please. But as you might have seen, the one with the most sufficiency policies of the NECPs was Austria on that previous graph. So it looked at what do Austria actually do. I mean, and they have actually done a few things. They want to increase cyclists with budget allocations, expanding of good bicycle infrastructure, and they are enhancing public transport with investment in railways, trams, faster trains, more regular trains, a lot of good plans for better trains, mobility management, less parking, and promoting of shared cars. So really have put that in. They also put in energy spatial planning, which is to make the functions closer to each other, so people don't need to travel so far, and at the same time give opportunity to make more common heating systems like district heating. And then they have incentives for new renewables energy markets, including local energy communities, which was the only one I could find who had energy communities, but it was a little difficult. It's not searchable, so I might have looked over some. And I don't know how well, I mean, this is on the level of the national plans, then comes implementation afterwards. And sometimes there's a gap from, as we all know, from plan to implementation. But please, next slide. And then, but then in the climate negotiations, we also have the long-term low-emission strategies. And for them, it's actually a lot more about sufficiency. And lifestyle is mentioned 111 times, and mostly in relation with low-carbon, sustainable or green lifestyles. And in most countries actually mention sustainable lifestyles for the long term, but not for the short term for some reason. And one example is France, who want to promote teleworking, car sharing, shorter routes, and shift towards trains and bicycles. Encourage more moderate use of dwellings, sometimes difficult to understand what they mean. I think it means smaller dwellings with lower temperature, but I'm not completely sure. And then they also want energy efficiency of fuels shift, and together with this sufficiency measures, they actually want to halve the energy consumption. And they want more organic food and less food waste. But they didn't speak about less meat now. So let's come to the next. So I'd like to end here. No, I'm not completely finished. I just want to finish that looking at this from what we have been analyzing and see what's already out there, we think that there's a basis that energy communities and sufficiency should have a role in the coming NDCs. And of course, we also hope it can be part of this conclusion, the analysis of the existing NDCs for the global stocktake, which is ongoing right now. And what we hope to what we both propose to look for and what we hope to include, that in housing sector, there should be policies for smaller houses and flats and reduce barriers for the sustainable tiny houses. Not all tiny houses are sustainable, but if they are made closely together in places where they are not spread urban sprawl, then they're actually a good thing. But if they're scattered all over countryside, they might not. And sharing of facilities, I mean that you can have one washing machine for many flats, or you can have other joint things so you didn't need so much space yourself. In transport sector, policies for reduced transport needs and distances, better bicycling, better public transport, more car sharing, and shared cars and less incentive for cars. For consumption, we could have circular economy policies for longer lifetime, better repair opportunities and reuse. For food, we should promote healthier diets, and you probably know healthier diets mean eat less meat. It's one part of, because in many parts of the world, including Europe, we eat too much meat, particularly the grown-ups, and less milk product also, and less food waste. And for energy supply, we think that there should be policies to increase local production and sharing of renewable energy, including with energy communities, both for heat and electricity. There needed to be a legal framework, better, not very good in many countries. It needs to be less bureaucratic. There need to be some charges and incentives also. And since we didn't have time, and we are still ongoing with the project, this is just a recommendation from our International Network for Sustainable Energy, as we didn't have the time to discuss it with the researchers and fulfill, but we hope to come back next year with more consolidated proposals. Thank you. And before, I had just one comment, there's nothing to do with my presentation, but if anyone are listening to this online, we have now opened the debate field in the Facebook event for this. So if you go to the INFORSE-Europe and the Facebook event, this Facebook event, and go to debate, you can actually make your questions. We'll try to answer them if you get some. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm looking for a future with more public transport, bicycling, car sharing, and less consumption and waste recycling, and a lot of renewable energy in communities when you can put up solar cells in your community around the houses, but you needed a couple of laws and regulations to help this, and also municipalities. Now it's we luckily have some time for questions and answers, and the panel would answer, or panel debate. So please Victor, could you help with the microphone? Yes.
Good afternoon, good evening. I'm Carolina Guti and I come from Uganda. I work for the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development, and we are developing our energy transition plan. On the energy scenarios, where you talked about no nuclear, and then you talked about hydrogen, then you said no water. What did you imply? Does it mean nuclear has carbon emissions, or you're talking about a scenario where we don't have nuclear? Because Uganda is actually progressing in the development of its nuclear potential. Thank you.
Yeah, as you probably know, nuclear is very expensive and it's also very slow to expand. So if you really want to be serious about climate change, we would need to expand something which is cheaper because it's more affordable also for us in Europe. And it's also possible to expand renewable in time with actual climate crisis. So we think that expanding nuclear would basically be waste of time and waste of money and will jeopardize the risk. I mean, the chances we will have any chance of meeting this 1.5 degree goes right against nuclear power. The more nuclear power we build or try to build, the less chances are that we will reach the 1.5%. And therefore we excluded nuclear new build, and then we got a gradual phase out of existing. We have a number of existing nuclear power plants in Europe, but they will all be out of their lifetime by 2050. So that's why we simply skipped it and went for the sustainable solutions instead. Other questions?
I would like to add to this that there's also a risk of accidents. So
yes.
It's
and the waste problem.
And also about how to maintain a nuclear power plant, also building problems, and also about maintaining a nuclear power plant. So I wouldn't recommend it to a nuclear power because of that reason either.
Yes, please.
Okay, hi. So I live in Ireland, and we have pretty bad infrastructure in terms of energy. Like, we have a huge issue with energy security, especially during the winter. This past winter, because of the invasion in Ukraine, our electricity bill shot up. I think usually we pay $200 or €300, and this past December and January we got a bill for $1,200. So, an issue with the heating, insufficient insulation, and then also in the rest of Ireland, we have really pretty bad public transport system. We're years away from even taking card payment. You actually can only pay with coin. You can't even pay with cash. And a lot of Irish people are still on the generally all meat or a nearly all meat diet. Anyways, I could go on. But how do you see countries that have so far to go? Is it more difficult for them to make this transition? And how do you think we should put pressure on our governments to make these changes?
Well, maybe I can say, I think on the one hand, looking at Ireland, you have fairly big potential of particular wind power and also some solar. There's limited biomass potential. There's some biomass, but limited potential of biomass in Ireland, as I know. So I think that all these could be put together, but at the same time having a big emphasis on saving energy. But given the crisis in the Russian-Ukrainian crisis, probably you'll need to change to away from gas, which we understand was one of the problems of the high prices because it was unreliable. It was not actually you got the gas, everybody got the gas, but they needed, but the price was just extraordinarily high for a while this fall. But then at the same time, recommend that you get some safety on the electricity prices, because the way the market is constructed, just because you miss a little bit of electricity, the market price skyrockets. And when the gas is expensive, often the last kilowatt hour of electricity is made with gas, and then with gas prices are high, and then electricity prices tend to get peaks also. So maybe we need another way of constructing the electricity market also, because if you have the majority coming from, say, wind or solar, it's all the same price. It doesn't get more expensive just because of some market effect. So you have to speak about this market also. I mean, I think that's the best I can do. I don't know. I think you can, of course, Ireland doesn't have so big cities like Central Europe. So, of course, there's something where it can be more difficult to expand the public transport. But on the other hand, find solutions for Ireland where you combine some better use of the existing tracks and, buses and bicycles. And also more shared cars, I would say.
I would like to also say that some of the initiatives which was examined and policies in the project, this was also, for example, if there would be a policy that providing for public canteens and schools vegetarian food for all days or one day a week, or so there's a lot of cutting emissions could be also with a changing diet. You could see the graph which was shown by Josephine, and that actually the diet is quite a big, surprisingly for me, a big portion of the CO2 emission.
How would I put the pressure on my government? Yeah, I totally agree that it should happen, but Ireland is very slow with any kind of changes at all. So I just feel like they're so behind and there's so much work to do. So how would you go about putting this pressure on the government to make these important changes?
I mean, we in INFORSE network, we have been supporting, showing the alternative. I mean, showing the alternative with scenarios like this one. And we didn't have we had some cooperation with Irish partners, but they didn't make a very strong scenario, but maybe you could make a better scenario and make it inclusive if you are able to get together a lot of people who could discuss how the future should be and then put it together in a scenario, in a vision that can be shared. And then also show the examples. I mean, it can be eco-villages and these initiatives like we heard about from Philipp. It can also be one of, as Judit mentioned, the policies for having more vegetarian food in public canteens and kitchens, so that the children in the kindergartens or the civil servants learn how to make good food. Of course, you need a good cook who can make nice food vegetarian, but and you probably shouldn't start by forbidding meat there, but just give it as an extra choice, so that it can become popularized. Even small steps count.
Abigail wants to say something. Maybe it's...
I would like to give a word for Abigail. Yes, please.
Great. Hi, I hope everyone can see me. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make the meeting today. With Josephine, we did this flash analysis looking at the implications of sufficiency and deprivation on carbon footprint. And I think this is very important. From our results, we find the importance of promoting energy efficiency in buildings. The people who consume the most, who emit the most emissions, the most carbon footprint, who consume the most energy, are often people who are also still struggling to pay their bills, struggling to keep warm, etc. This is to a large extent linked to a lack of energy efficiency. So you've got specific ways. So during the crisis last year, at least in Germany, there were lots of campaigns as to how to better heat your house. So awareness is definitely one. How to properly, what people can do, how to isolate, how to empty your radiators, etc. So for this, which is strongly associated with deprivation, these are a means that you can, on a local, on an individual level, or as a community or an association, there are information you can press. It's very important, but also on a political level, to try to encourage to have norms and regulations, especially for people who are renting, who do not have the possibility to renovate their homes, etc. So in Germany, there's recently been a tax for people people who are renting out their buildings, etc. So I mean, depending on the sector, you obviously have different things that you can concentrate on, but that's just one example.
Yeah, I'll just maybe make a final small comment about this. Coming from Greece, everything we hear about Ireland is good. So you guys have a very good image in Europe. So maybe internally it looks, the reality is different. But why I talk about the image is I think it's because it's quite important as a lever to push governments. I think domestically they might ignore the activists, the movements, the NGOs, but once they see that their image in Europe or internationally is jeopardized, they're more likely to take action. So that's where you can loop in the European movements, the European NGOs like Client Earth, usually takes governments to court if they're breaching EU directives. But that's why we also built the tracker that I showed before, the public financing tracker, because it's an easy to understand visual tool that can name and shame countries on whether they're supporting energy communities with public funds. So I think usually bringing in that European perspective is a way to exert pressure.
Yeah, I also would like to comment it a little bit that in Denmark, for example, every municipality has towns has climate plans. So they have to actually make a climate plan, and then it could be part of this climate plan that often about public transport and food and all these things. So, and in Denmark there is also a guideline. So they didn't. There was an initiative to make it a law and about vegetarian food in the public places, but it was not. Didn't get successful. But there are made a very nice guideline. So a nice graphic and everything, and then it is as some effects. So
yeah, we have 5 minutes left, so I think everybody else who wants to have a question should just send a question now, and then we can get a round of answers.
Please, yes.
Thank you. I'm from France, and I'm very interested in I'm very interested in the link between, in the use of public participation to build political energy transition politics. At the moment, you mentioned a study, a comparison between citizen assemblies part of sufficiency policies and the one proposed by governments. 2 questions on that. First, did this study have sorry for my bad English. Did this study have a survey on a larger public, not a citizen assembly? I mean, a kind of questionnaire with the same question. I don't know what's the form of what you use, but is there in your study an option of this survey on a larger public and on the citizen assembly in themselves? Were they random drafted? What kind of citizen assemblies were they? Thank you.
Yeah, the next question.
Cool. Thank you so much for the presentation. My name's Haley. I am with Care About Climate, but I work in climate adaptation for local government by day. And a lot of this seems like it could be really, really useful. However, something that we face as a local government often is the ability to identify how to provide the right amount for an incentive or to determine how our community might react to a certain incentive will then ultimately make it not possible to implement. I'm even thinking about encourage people to move to smaller homes. I don't think that would fly. Where I live in Hawaii also, so we have the context of climate adaptation, sea level rise, and everything we have to balance. And so I'm wondering from your experience what's your experience with getting backlash from the community on any types of these proposals, and how have you managed that?
Larry Moffat with Rise for Climate Belgium. It's a question for Fraunhofer. On the slide, sufficiency as a concept, you showed rebound effects. Could you explain how that adversely affects sufficiency? Can you quantify it, and how to try to compensate for that, those rebound effects?
Okay, if I'm answering the last one about this, about moving to smaller homes and what with these things, I mean, all the things we developed here are made for European, but could be done for similar regions like North America, where people have fairly well off, and we found this limit of 30 to 40 square meter per person in this clever scenario. And it's not part of the fulfilled scenario, but we think that that would be a reasonable size. But in most other parts of the world, people are living in smaller houses, so we don't necessarily recommend smaller houses there. And for the sources of municipalities can do a lot of things, and we found that quite important, that is from the fulfilled study, that we found it quite important that they actually get involved and that they support these initiatives, whether it's a cargo bike rental, they need the place to have the cargo bikes. If it's an eco-village, they need to be open for having this eco-village somewhere, of course in dialogue with the local people who already live there, and for in many other ways. And sometimes it has to do with support, but it's not only support, because municipalities do a lot of things. Should we go on to the next of Josephine?
Maybe the one question you asked with the rebound effect. So on the one hand, it is a problem with from the conceptual part. It is kind of a source why sufficiency got into the debate a little bit more. So we have a lot of rebound effects from efficiency devices, for instance, that people think they can now, when they, for instance, they buy an electric car and then they can move travel more, larger distances, and so on. These are some kind of rebound effects, but they are very multifaceted. And in the sufficiency debate, it is also going on that we need to explore if there are any rebound effects. And in our study, we do not have analyzed it yet, but in the second wave, we have the plan to also look at this rebound effects, maybe also from sufficiency. Of course, one can imagine every system change has side effects, and I think there will be effects from sufficiency also. And for instance, everybody buys a new bike, so we have also resources that we not waste, but that we consume. So it is a very it is a problem. And in which direction do we go, and how do we really decrease emissions? So it's a hard job, but we will look at it. I don't know if anybody or Philipp from the Wuppertal Institute, I know they have also a lot of studies on rebound effects, if he wants to add something from his perspective. Yeah. How about no? Is he still there? I don't know. Well,
yeah. I think we have to also finish now because we are in time, or on time. So thank you for all participation also here in Bonn and online. And we are looking forward that you are actually looking into these opportunities. And you are welcome to look at the website mentioned.
Yeah. And I'd also like to say goodbye from the INFORSE network, and we have some materials up here, and we'll be available outside. We have to leave the room now for the next side event, but thank you all for coming, and for those of you online also. Thank you.